Welcome everyone back to our Wally Bites Lake Leaders video series, episode 4. Today, our special guest is Daryl Pierce, Area 5 Fisheries Manager with the PA Fish and Boat Commission. Daryl, I hope I got that right.
Yeah, I did great. Good afternoon.
So if you could start out just by telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, your day-to-day responsibilities, what a typical day is like for you at work.
Fantastic. So my name is Daryl Pierce. I'm the Area 5 Fisheries Manager for Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And what that means is I have the responsibilities for surveying the waters in the Upper Delaware drainage. That starts with the confluence of the Lehigh Basin, inclusive of the Lehigh, the Lackawaxen, which the Wallenpaupack is part of, all the way up into the Hancock area for the West Branch. My basic duties are to go out, survey waters, to find out how many fish are there, what type of fish are there, are they doing well, is there something bad, do we need to adjust something in terms of regulations to make an improved fishing opportunity for anglers, or are things good the way they are? Some of the major projects that we touch on in this office is American shad every spring and summer for their run, how strong was the run, and then subsequently how many young do we think were produced. Other projects, we're monitoring the Upper Delaware trout tailwater fishery that's generated from the New York City reservoirs. We monitor smallmouth bass in the Delaware and Lehigh River. We monitor trout for the Lehigh below Francis Walter. And then we survey waters. I've been trying to get most of our lake waters into rotation so we can understand what the lakes are showing us in terms of bass fisheries, panfish fisheries, what kind of panfish are there, and do we need to change regs for those and regs for those lakes as well. And then after all of that, late summer tends to be occupied by surveying our creeks for trout and assigning biomass classifications to the various trout waters that we get into.
Awesome. How many years have you been with the PA Fish and Boat Commission?
I started with PA Fish and Boat back in September 2005. So that's roughly a little under or right around 17 years.
Wow. And how many people are part of your team there at Area 5?
We are staffed with one other permanent biologist, a fisheries biologist too. And then we have a seasonal staff that starts generally in the beginning of May and lasts till about Thanksgiving to get us through the field season.
Awesome. So given our audience and kind of the nature of our website, Wally Bites, I'd like to focus primarily on Lake Wallenpaupack. I know that was one of the bodies of water that you said you've studied. And in my opinion, this is Wallenpaupack is a very prized body of water in terms of fishing, right? There's some beautiful game fish in there. What do you think makes that lake such a beloved destination for fishing?
It offers something of everything. You can go to that water and fish for what you want. I mean, it has good panfish, it has good bass. It's got northern pike in it that have decent size to it. You can go for catfish. There's trout in it. It's something for everybody, and it's a fairly easy lake to fish. So if you find the shallows, you can get into some panfish pretty decent, and end up with a nice panfish fry at the end of the day.
It's funny you say it's an easy lake to fish, because we've had our good days and we feel like we've got it figured out, and then we'll go back the next day and that lake, she humbles even the best fishermen, it seems like, where you'll fish for 8 hours and have nothing to show for it.
Well, that's why it's fishing, right? Fishing. Of course, I cheat with nets, but
a little bit off script here. But as you were naming the species in Wallenpaupack, one of the things that I've always wondered is, are there any muskie anywhere in that lake?
I would not be surprised if someone pulls up a muskie. We do not stock muskellunge or tigers into that water. I do know northern pike are there. We've caught them during the gillnet survey that's in that web report. But I'm sure in the legacy days that muskies were stocked at one point, there may be a legacy muskie population in there that's exceptionally rare. I just haven't happened into any of them, but I'm not going to discount them.
Yeah. We've heard from some people that head up under the bridge near Ledgedale up into the river. The deeper and further they go up into the river, that they've caught muskie up there. So I'm assuming if they're in that waterway, then they would eventually migrate or find themselves in the bigger lake. But we haven't seen or really heard much of it.
Right. And again, I won't discount it. I mean, when we come back for our next gillnet survey, we'll put some specifically up in the river. I didn't do it this year because of time constraints, but we will set farther up.
So let's talk a little bit, Daryl, about that gillnet survey. I know you guys recently conducted a gillnet survey. We summarized kind of what the results of that biologist report were on our website in an article. For the audience who's not aware, what is a gillnet survey? What are the steps in performing such a thing, and what is the ultimate goal of such a survey?
Sure. So there's multiple ways to survey a fish population, and one of the prime ways that we use is electrofishing. So folk may be familiar with that. That's where we put electricity in a controlled way into the water to temporarily stun fish so that we can net them up, count, measure, and throw them back in. Electricity doesn't hurt the fish. It just temporarily knocks them out. And then once they wake back up, they're gone. In case of Lake Wallenpaupack, that is a very large lake. That's also a deep lake. Electrofishing is not the best gear to go in and try and find a fish. So an alternative gear is a gill net, and think of that as a curtain, and it's a curtain of monofilament that's of various different size openings. So if you took like a woven hammock and hung it on its side where you see a lot of holes through it, the fish will swim into the gill net, and then they'll get trapped. And then we can come along later, pick up the gill net, see what's in there, and then count, measure, and throw them all back. We tend to do gill net surveys early in the year or late in the year when water temperatures are cool to help reduce or eliminate mortality from that gill net.
And I'm guessing that's probably also when those fish are more likely to be up in the more shallow water. Once that water gets a certain temperature, they're most likely going to go a little deeper.
Correct. Particularly for walleye or stripers.
Yeah.
In the early spring, they're looking to spawn. That's a good time to target them.
And the goal of a gillnet survey is, I guess, for the PA Fish and Boat Commission to kind of assess the healthiness of the fishery.
That's one of the goals. So the question is, how many fish are there? What size are they? Are we producing a fish through our stockings that are reaching the recreational anglers at a size that they like? On the sizes that we found in the gillnet survey, we're certainly seeing a large trophy-sized stripers in that lake. The other goal is we do stock it, and so the question becomes, are the stockings even working? So if we go out and do a survey and we come up empty or with very few fish, the question is, do we change our stocking rates? Do we add more fish into it, or do we have to do something different?
So there's a big science behind stocking, right? A lot of this gillnet survey results, I guess, feeds into, it's not just as easy as saying we're going to put millions of fingerling in the lake this year. There has to be some sort of science and research behind that. And I'm guessing that's what the purpose is of such a survey. That's
exactly what this is. So if we put in a certain rate and we're not seeing any fish, then we make adjustments and retest.
Okay.
And so it takes several years to get down to where you think you're comfortable stocking at this rate is going to produce X amount of fish later on.
Yeah. You guys have done these gillnet surveys historically. What is it, every 5 or 6 years or so?
Well, for this intent, specifically targeting for stripers, that the first year was in 2017. I'm going to try and get out there every 3 years or every 4 years, depending on my schedule. so that I can get a consistent time series to where we can look back and see how the population's trending. Is it going up? Is it going down? Right now, with just 2 years under our belt, we really can't say much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, we hear, obviously, we work with a lot of the fishing guides, and they've told us, that it seems or presents down. I think the idea or the concern is that some of those large stripers, whether pure or hybrid, are reaching their full maturity age, and I think that they're seeing potentially a drop off once they hit that mature age, and then maybe if we're not having additional fish put in and those fish are dying off based on old age per se, then what happens to the fishery? It's not a question for you, Daryl, but one of my questions is, in your opinion, what makes Lake Wallenpaupack such a good fishery, aside from the fact that it's a multi-species body of water? Is it the environment? Is it where it's located? What are some of the things or characteristics that you can apply to why you think it's such a good fishery?
Two reasons that really stand out to me. One is its size. It's a very large lake. It has a lot of habitat available, and it has the critical habitats available for the different life cycles that the species need. So, for instance, a walleye or striper, they can migrate up into the West Branch and find their spawning grounds, and not just find them, but there's plenty of it. I mean, at that point, the West Branch is really good. It's large and wide, and there's plenty of space for the walleyes to go through the motions. The other thing that's fantastic for that lake is it has a very strong forage base. So the alewives are just thick as fleas, right? That's good. That's not bad. That's good. So
there's a lot of feeder fish there.
Yeah. So if a fish is hungry, it's there. They can find it. They can bulk up to their size relatively easily, relatively quick. Now, from an angling standpoint, yeah, they're fat and happy. They may not want to strike on your lures now, right? But that forage base is what's really key to getting fish up to size.
What you just said reminded me of something that has been a point of discussion for many years, at least since Wally Bites has been has had an audience at Wallenpaupack. Is it true or false that the landlocked striper that are stocked in Wallenpaupack are not able to spawn and reproduce?
Maybe.
So we've heard that a lot of people say they're not able to reproduce because there's not that constant moving water for the eggs and whatever that environment needs to be for that to happen. And so that's why a lot of our anglers and audience members rely so heavily on stocking numbers, is because they're under the impression that these fish are not reproducing. Every fish caught and released is a fish for another day.
I would say that stripers are likely not spawning in Wallenpaupack. They're certainly probably trying to go through the motions. If they're successful or not, I would say that's probably pretty low. So here's why I'm saying maybe. We took a fish that's on the Atlantic coast, where it's being told by its genes, hey, I got to go north, find my river, and then spawn there in a very particular habitat. It's got to have flow. It's got to have a sloping sand beach. And neither of those two are really readily available in Wallenpaupack. Their migration, if you would, is maybe a mile compared to what they're supposed to be doing. And they're not finding their signature home water. So there's cues that are missing. As to whether or not they're going through the motions, I'm sure they are. As to whether or not they're putting out eggs, I'm sure they are. I'm sure Mother Nature is finding a way that maybe a little rare occurrence that those eggs are going to develop, but we cannot rely on that for a viable fishery. And that's why we end up annual stocking with these, and it's called maintenance stocking, so that we continuously put in a new batch of fish that can grow up and replace those that are dying from older age.
Is that something that the state those maintenance stockings? Is that something that the state intends to continue? Because we've also heard equal rumors that the state is no longer going to stock striped bass, whether hybrids, pures, into Lake Wallenpaupack. And I think that our audience would love to hear whether or not that, even on a maintenance level basis, that there's still intent to put fish into the water.
Well, that's a good question and a great concern. I hear you. It would be my intent to continue status quo stocking of striped bass in the Lake Wallenpaupack as long as we can. Now, with that being said, the only thing that gets a little tricky is our state system does not hatch striped bass. We get those gratis from other state hatcheries. Generally, we've been very fortunate that there's plenty of overproduction from other state hatcheries, and we've been able to maintain a very consistent maintenance stocking in Wallenpaupack. Now, there's other waters as well throughout the state. Raystown certainly raises the issue. They receive stripers, or Beltsville in our area, they receive stripers as well. So there is a bit of compromise, but I would like to see what's in that web report continue ad infinitum for striped bass as we can.
That's a great answer, and people are going to be thrilled to hear that. And again, we understand that the state's under no obligation, but I know that there will be a lot of people excited to at least hear that there's some interest in continuing that. Which we've talked about stockings a little bit, and I have another question. So instead of putting the onus on the state, and Daryl, your team, what can we do as anglers, as residents, visitors to the lake community and other bodies of water to help the fisheries? Do you have any advice that you can share with our audience about what we can be doing to help?
Well, I think you all are doing a good job right now, raising awareness of what the fisheries are and how to fish them. Establish etiquette. This is how we like to see anglers use the fishery. We say thank you and please, and while catch and release is really nice, some folk do like to harvest. And to be honest with you, if I end up with a 36-inch striped bass out of Lake Wallenpaupack, that thing's going to hit the dinner plate, right? So I mean, there's always going to be that component. So just be aware that anglers have different expectations for their trips, and I think that is a great word to spread out to folk.
Do you yourself fish, Daryl?
I used to, but I got spoiled with electricity and other.
You've got some interesting fishing techniques now, I guess.
Yeah, I'd find myself in jail.
The one thing that did stand out in the biologist report, kind of going back to that gillnet survey, it did look like one of the decisions as a result of the survey was that hybrid striped bass stocking was going to be discontinued this year.
That's correct.
Could you kind of explain why that decision was made?
Correct. So there is escapement that can happen out of Lake Wallenpaupack. I mean, they have wedge wire on the intakes, so they try to minimize it, but it can happen. And every so often, you hear about alewife that get through the intake or other fish. While striper or the hybrid stripers are technically infertile, since the striped bass itself, the pure striped bass, is one of the fisheries on the Atlantic coast, we prefer not to mix or dilute the gene pool or the presence of hybrid stripers in that population through an escapement, if possible, from Wallenpaupack. And then the other thing that's happening too is there's anglers desiring striped bass out in the western PA. And so if we reallocate the hybrid striped bass to the western side of the state, then we can get opportunity for those anglers out there as well.
Could you help me understand, maybe it's my own ignorance, escapement? What does that term mean?
So escapement. So there's a physical pipe opening in the dam at the lower end of the lake, and that's where Brookfield is taking water for their powerhouse.
Right.
I do not know the size of that pipe, but the fish can just physically get into that pipe and swim down. Now, if they're generating, generally, if they're generating electricity, they can be ground up in the turbines. But sometimes fish make it through and survive, and then find themselves in the Lackawaxen River.
Okay.
And from that point, they're available to the entire Atlantic coast.
Wow. I never thought, I guess I just, now that I think about it, it's easy to think that a fish could find that hole and get through there, but I never thought in a million years that's a thing.
It happens more frequently than you think, but the turbines, it just depends on their operations. They tend to ensure that fish do not survive that passage.
And then, Daryl, will we classify that as almost like an invasive species question, which then going off script also kind of leads me to another elephant in the room with like the snakeheads and some of the other things. Like if a striped bass or a fish that's not supposed to be in the Lackawaxen gets through and ends up in a place that it's not supposed to be, that's detrimental to the ecosystem, correct? Or potentially?
Well, not really, no. So striped bass are indigenous to the Delaware drainage because they come from the Atlantic Ocean. So if a striped bass from Lake Wallenpaupack gets back out into the Atlantic coast, it originated from Atlantic coast stock from the other state hatcheries. So I wouldn't call that an invasive species or a detriment. It's just escapement. And that's why we're trying to eliminate the escapement of the hybrids, just because we don't want to impact what's already there for the pures on the coast. In terms of other fish, if they get out, brown trout or yellow perch or bass or whatever it is, alewife, again, they've been all naturalized or indigenous to the Delaware Basin, not necessarily a problem. In terms of flatheads or snakeheads or other recent invasives like that, getting up through the penstock is going to be a 1 in a million. It's going to be very low risk, particularly again if they're generating. It just won't happen.
Yeah, because we haven't heard of any confirmed cases of snakehead at Wallenpaupack.
And I hope we never do.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge is going to be that somebody decides they want snakehead in the lake and then introduce it that way. That's likely the mechanism that'll happen.
If that were to, so we're trained as anglers or sportsmen to obviously take that fish species, that invasive species from the lake and kill it. Is there, once that type of species is introduced to the lake, do we have a chance to kind of protect the lake and the waterway, or once it's done, it's done?
So if an angler thinks they have a snakehead or a flathead or any invasive species, take a picture, write down the date, write down the location. GPS would be the best, so you can get an actual satellite fix on it. Send that to myself or Sean Hartzell. Let us know. From there, an action plan will be put together and decisions will be made how to handle that particular situation.
Hopefully we never get to that point.
Yeah, hopefully we never do. So again, one of the best things that y'all can do for us is put the word out. Please don't introduce invasives into Lake Wallenpaupack.
Yeah. And I think that's a great response too. Like that's why we do this stuff, is to inform people like, hey, I caught this fish. What are we supposed to do? People just don't know because the information might not be as clear or readily available to them. So the more people that we can tell through things like this, through your website, I think hopefully our environment and ecosystems will stay healthier.
Right. Now, I will add one last thing I forgot to say. If they do think they have a snakehead or a flathead, do not throw it back. Harvest that fish and either freeze it or call me, or, there's certainly a picture, but do not throw it back.
If we could go back to the discontinuation of stocking hybrid striped bass, Daryl, is that a permanent decision, or is that something that would be reconsidered as these gillnet surveys or more research is done over the years?
That's a permanent decision.
Okay.
So it's done.
So the hybrid that are in Wallenpaupack, enjoy them while we have them.
That's correct. Now, on the other side, if we find out through subsequent surveys in future years that we need to up our stocking of the piers to continue supporting the fishery as it is, those decisions can happen when we find that out.
So talking about that stocking event, many of the things, when you guys stock, it's mostly fingerling and fry. Is that correct?
Correct.
Does the PA Fish and Boat Commission, do you guys have any evidence or knowledge or maybe just any idea of how many actual fingerling or fry survive those stocking events? A lot of our anglers have heard stories about like watching the truck back down Mangan Cove, dumping trout, fingerling, fry, whatever at that up at the dam, and just watching the striper have a feeding frenzy up there. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts? How many of those stocked trout or fingerling actually survive versus get eaten right away?
Well, it's high. So mortality is high. I don't have a specific number for you to say, this is what it is, but that's one of the reasons of this whole survey. So say we put in a kabillion fish, well, how many adults do we get back that we can attribute to that stocking? And if we're finding out that we're having a few adults in our surveys, well, then maybe that stocking isn't happening. Yes, we're expecting a lot of mortality, and I've had fellas tell me the best fishing they ever had was when we stocked the fingerlings.
Yeah.
So I fully understand that, but the striped bass that we're seeing in the last 2 years, it actually increased in 2021 over to 2017. So they're doing well. So a few of them are surviving, and we're getting them to the fishery, and that's what we really need to see. So on the other end, are we feeding fish with the fry? Yeah, to an extent, but we're still getting survival out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's working for sure. I mean, the striper population seems like it's thriving. Fishing is great. And I'd like to be there for one of those events just to watch that feeding frenzy actually unfold.
It is pretty fun.
One last question, if I may, about the biologist report. One of the things I noted while looking at the results was the low catch rate of channel catfish. Was that expected? Because it looked like in previous years of gillnet surveys, the numbers were much higher.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And we're going to have to come back in subsequent years. So the gillnets that we use, they were fished on the bottom. Okay, so we're in the habitat of where channels are. And they were fished for 24 hours. So we should have encountered channel catfish. So now two things are happening. One, we may have missed it a little early when we went out. Maybe we should go a little later when channel catfish are moving for spawning. So we'd have a higher chance to be able to capture catfish rather than early spring where they're hunkered down still in deep water and not really moving around. The other thing that's happening is we made a decision several years ago. I don't remember the one off the top of my head, but we stopped stocking. So we used to do maintenance stocking of channels in Lake Wallenpaupack, and we stopped. And that was because we thought we had enough of a population there that they were natural spawning and they would support themselves. Maybe that's not necessarily happening anymore. And so maybe in a follow-up survey or two surveys, we're going to say, okay, channel catfish are really low. It's still a desired fishery in Wallenpaupack. Maybe we should reinitiate stocking.
Great. Yeah, it was really fun to read through the biologist report. If it's okay with you, I'd like to link it in this video or in the description below.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I'd love it if our audience would take the time to read that. There's a lot of interesting information in there in terms of how many fish of each species were caught, min and max sizes of each species. And it really kind of gives, in my opinion, a really good picture of, just in those 24 hours or however long those gill nets sat, what kind of fish were caught. And that to me it paints a nice picture of what this fishery looks like and what it looks like today. So that was all the questions that I had. Ed, did you have anything for him?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think, for me in closing, we have a healthy waterway with Lake Wallenpaupack. Daryl, would you say that's a fair assessment?
It's a robust fish population. It's something to be very proud of.
And the water quality in the lake is still relatively good?
I generally don't get involved with water quality to too much extent. I know there has been some algal blooms in the upper end near Ledgedale. That's just a fact of how much urbanization now that we have around the lake. But to my understanding, from what I'm seeing on the fish populations, they're not strongly impacted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from me, Daryl, and our audience, thank you for all you do for our waterways. I'm sure it's not an easy job and an easy task, but
it does sound fun though. Electro fishing.
Well, yeah, I do enjoy that.
But thank you so much there. Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure meeting you. I know you and Trevor have spoken on and off a few times, so it's been a real pleasure.
Oh, certainly. Thank you very much. And I enjoyed talking with you all, and don't be strangers, right? If you have more questions, feel free to send them along.